Welcome to Voices Against Violence, a Harmony House podcast to educate, empower, and serve as a voice for survivors. We aim to shed light on crucial issues surrounding domestic violence, offer support, and inspire action for change. Join us as we work together to create a community where all individuals can live a life free of abuse. Welcome to Voices Against Violence. I'm Charity Jordan-Rex, Prevention Program Manager for Harmony House. And we are doing our first book discussion episode, and joining me today is Emily Stoinski of Safe Connections in St. Louis. Emily is passionate about empowering the community to respond to relationship and sexual harm and addressing the experience and needs of marginalized populations. She's spent 9.5 years working directly with survivors of harm and providing community education. Emily believes every person has the ability to prevent and or reduce the impact of violence in their relationships, families, and larger community through curiosity and love. Emily has served as a member of the Futures Without Violence Catapult Advisory Council, engaging college-aged men in violence prevention, go Emily, and survivor support, and as a chair for the St. Louis City Domestic Violence Fatality Review Panel. And we connected a while back. I am so excited. Emily, welcome to the podcast.
I am beyond excited to be here, so thank you so much for having me.
Those of you who are listening, you won't know this, but I'll just go ahead and confess. I probably sent Emily at least 3 emails saying, hey, do you want to be on the podcast? Here's some dates. And then life happened. And then and so finally it's like, oh my gosh, okay, here are dates. Let me send you a calendar invite. So I'm excited. Emily, tell us a little bit about what you do, what's Safe Connections.
All the stuff. First I need listeners to know the way that I describe it now in some ways to folks is I'm essentially the charity in St. Louis. So Safe Connections, we do a lot of similar work in that we have a mission to support survivors of relationship and sexual violence within our community, but also do what we can to prevent those incidents from happening through prevention education and then professional education for folks to support survivors in more meaningful ways. So my role is essentially to provide adult education, to engage in community outreach, really do everything that I can to help, all of us, people that care about our neighbors, our loved ones, have, information on how to support survivors, but also how to engage sometimes in hard conversations when we see our loved ones maybe acting in ways that are problematic.
Mm-hmm. Our previous director here at Harmony House, I think the two of you sat on a committee together through the coalition. And yes. He came back super excited to tell me about you. He's like, I think you would love her. And so we connected, and it is just so rewarding to have a connection with someone who is doing the same kind of work in St. Louis. And I love that we're getting to collaborate in some ways. And also Safe Connections, similar to Harmony House, this year is celebrating their 50th anniversary.
Yes, we are. I will tell you the excitement that came forth, literally, I felt like out of my body when I learned that you all were also celebrating 50. It just got really exciting to think about, that community members, everyday people, within Springfield, within St. Louis, in 1976, really decided to put, action and efforts in really intentional ways towards survivor support. And so it's so cool to be celebrating that, both with you all and hyping you all as well.
Yes, same. And we are working on some collaborations, to highlight that 50th anniversary for both of our organizations. Yeah. So stay tuned for more on that. So this episode, we are going to be discussing Nobody's Girl by Virginia Giuffre. And so I want to give a disclaimer. That autobiography does talk about her experiences as a survivor of both domestic abuse, trafficking, child abuse. So this conversation may contain elements of descriptions of domestic violence along with child abuse. child sexual abuse. So please be aware. So Nobody's Girl by Virginia Giuffre came out just last year. She unfortunately has since passed. The full title, A Memoir of Surviving Abuse and Fighting for Justice, Virginia Roberts Giuffre. And she was probably one of the most prominent of the Epstein survivors that came forward to talk about what happened to them and to do advocacy around holding those perpetrators accountable, and that ended up writing a book, which we have both read.
Yes, we both did. Very excited to talk about it.
Yeah, let's get into it. So for those who haven't read it, Emily, give us a brief summary of what that's about.
I'm just going to give a brief overview of her life, which is covered in the memoir. So Virginia was born in 1983. I'm going to refer to it as that she had a challenging household. There were a lot of different experiences that she had, ranging from multiple instances of child sexual abuse, as well as trafficking in her younger teenage years, and just a lot of tumultuous environmental things that were going on. In mid-2000, Virginia met Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein, where she was groomed by them, assaulted, and trafficked to others, including alleging with former Prince Andrew. She met her husband Robert while on a trip paid for by Epstein, and they began living in Australia. It should be noted that while there were prior cases that were opened, was known by law enforcement that this was somebody that was potentially problematic. As a result of that, really from that moment, she began to really fight to bring visibility and justice to these individuals, standing up for so many other survivors. I also want to note that while her book does not talk about this, she did have domestic violence documented, experienced pretty significant domestic violence. And as you kind of noted, she was noted to have died by suicide in April of last year. I want to highlight that because I think oftentimes we may not be talking about that as often maybe being what happens with victims. That being stated, though, she was also a human being who lived. She was not just a victim of powerful people. While her name probably in a lot of ways will be forever connected to the folks that have caused her harm, she was also somebody who deeply loved her kids. And other survivors often have spoken about her saying, she was the first one that then gave other people the bravery to also stand up and essentially release the shame of their experiences.
Yeah. Reading that book, I did the audiobook, and you are just really struck by how much courage and bravery that it took for her to come forward with her story, which is horrific, but advocating for herself, for other survivors, and advocating for justice for all of those victims. Just the whole time I was reading it, I thought, I can't imagine what this must have been like for her to have gone through it. But then you've got to relive it when you come forward and tell your story. And then you've got to relive it again as you're advocating. And her story is really compelling. It's also you have to be in the right headspace for this story. And there were times when I had to put it down and take a break because it is really heavy. She does not shy away from helping you understand what she experienced really throughout her life. Why do you think that story is so compelling, though?
Because it's so real, and one thing that I will forever say time and time again with this book is that she does not shy away from all the moments in which she caused harm or she, made really interesting decisions. I remember specifically, she talks about her court settlement, and specifically asking for money for some type of like monetary retribution from Epstein. And she talks about, she's like, I sought this and there was a specific amount that I asked for because it was going to help with my like housing costs. And I think some people, could look at that situation and go, wow, this was just somebody maybe that was manipulative or lying, rather than, oh, this is somebody whose life was completely changed because of the harm that she experienced. Absolutely, that would impact, potentially like job opportunities, access to resources, etc. Mm-hmm. Yeah, then no wonder if she's an opportunity, to have some type of, very minuscule support from the person that has harmed her, then absolutely. So I think it's because it's just so real. She also talks about, playing a part and like other folks also being connected to the harm caused by Epstein and Maxwell. And I think that a lot of people have a very specific idea of what a trafficking survivor looks like. And I think this book really shows us that it's so much more nuanced than people often think about.
Mm-hmm. She does talk about that on several occasions, that she was had to traffic other victims. And we've talked about this on the podcast before, but there's this idea that like, if you're a victim, that, but then you're engaging in it, then you're complicit. But I think people really have to understand that if you're the victim, and really they control, Epstein and Maxwell controlled every aspect of her life, what choice do you have? Like, you're trying to survive. And so if your captor says, hey, I'm going to need you to go do that, they were threatening her family, that like, you're going to do what they tell you to do. And so I think it's really important for folks to understand that distinction between causing the harm, which in this case really was Epstein and Maxwell and all of the perpetrators that they brought through, and a difference between being forced to engage in behavior that you wouldn't otherwise do, but you're doing under duress and because you're forced to. And so those parts kind of made me sad, because she does express guilt and regret for her part in finding new victims for them. And I was listening and just thinking, but girl, like, you didn't have a choice. Like, it wasn't, this wasn't your scheme. This wasn't you. Like, you were a victim and being forced to go out and get other victims. And I also maybe you understood this when you started reading the book, but I didn't really know that it was going to cover kind of her whole life. I thought it was really just going to be her experience with Epstein and like how they met and all that transpired there. But she tells about her childhood, which is one of the most difficult and painful stories that I've heard. And it helps.
Can we talk about that?
Yes. So, and it's been a while since I've read this, so if I get some details wrong, Emily, feel free to jump in and correct me. But basically, she did not have safe adults at home. I believe she said was it her stepfather, or no, it was her actual father that was abusing her.
But also her actual.
Yeah, her bio father. He sexually abused her. And when you understand, so he also trafficked her and had a friend who they swapped daughters. I think that was the most difficult part of that whole story. As bad as all of the Epstein things were, she was a child and her father was trafficking her to another pedophile, another predator, but they were swapping daughters. What was the hardest part as you were reading this, Emily? 'Cause that was the hardest part for me.
Yeah. It's funny is I think you saying that to me, I would say, oh yeah, absolutely. I think that being among the hardest, because I think I went into this book anticipating talking about Epstein, anticipating, talking about her accounts allegedly with Prince Andrew. Like, I went into that knowing those pieces, but then you learn all of these kind of other experiences that she had. I think that just adds this extra layer of, oh, this wasn't just like but this was a lifetime of this type of harm that you experience. I also was not aware of her experience like with her husband and that domestic violence. Sometimes there's like certain news things that just like are not in my zeitgeist for whatever reason, and that was one of them. And that was challenging, reading. I'll say also too, like reading the note kind of prior to her content in the book where they were talking about domestic violence. And honestly, getting to the end of the book and knowing that it, like, this is how this ends, and that, like, landing and feeling that, oh my gosh, this was like a full-fledged human in all of her humanity that really tried her best and did everything that she could, and she is no longer here. And what does that mean then for all of us in domestic and sexual violence support and response to really like continue to pass the torch that she ignited, if you will.
Yeah, she really did. She was, again, one of the first to come forward, probably one of the most prominent of the survivors. I think, yeah, that piece, that author's note before her story starts, and it was in the news that like there were suspected domestic violence, I think documented domestic violence, but that's not in the book. So I don't know if she chose not to put it in the book or that came after, but that story comes to light after the book is published. And so when you read her story, it is very complimentary of her husband at the time. And so then in the back of my head, I'm thinking, okay, but he was an abuser. And so I'm thinking of this woman who was so intelligent, so strong, so brave, so capable. I mean, who knows what she could have done in the world had she not had that trauma, but really had a whole life of trauma, and did all the right things. That was the other thing through all of her story. So she's facing abuse at home. She doesn't have a good relationship with mom. She has siblings, but it's a really violent, abusive home. And the sexual abuse with her father, he starts that pretty early. And so, of course, like, she runs away. And so it's just this big cycle of being vulnerable because of the harm and trauma that she's experienced, and not being able to get help. And save for, I think there was one person that she said was helpful to her in that period, but really every adult in her life failing her, every single one.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, and kind of talking about this. This is probably like the educator in me coming out, so I'm going to apologize in advance.
Don't apologize for educating.
It just like makes me think about, this is going to sound so nerdy too. This just makes me think about the amygdala. So for those that may not be as familiar, it makes me think about, the part of our brain that really detects danger. And one of the things that we talk about in domestic and sexual violence spaces is that when somebody experiences multiple or ongoing forms of trauma, that part of brain just kind of keeps getting activated to the point then it becomes really challenging to identify if something is like dangerous or safe. And it just makes me think exactly what you're talking about. So if you have, this woman who has had a lifetime of harm, then what is dangerous, what is not, can kind of become skewed. And it also just makes me think too about like how much care I want to give to her, especially thinking about the harm that she experienced from her husband, because maybe it wasn't this specific type of harm, so my brain is not like, that's not like necessarily being that alertive, I got to protect myself, like that being super impacted because of everything that happened.
Yeah, that's a really good point. One of the things that I recalled as I was reading the book, I think one of the first stories that I read about her in the news was that, like, I think they described her as a massage therapist. And I thought, well, my goodness, why would a massage therapist? You're a professional. Why would you be involved with Epstein? But that's not the story. And so that grooming, that abuse, the trafficking started at the hands of the people that she should have been able to trust the most, her parents. She runs away, ends up in foster home, more abuse, runs away. And Epstein actually is not, aside from her father, Epstein's not the first trafficker. She meets someone else. I think after she had run away from a foster home, and she's a teenager. She doesn't have any money. But she's pretty. She's young and pretty. And so she goes with this person. But you think about that, like, home isn't safe. You don't know anyone else. You don't have any resources. You're a teenager. What else are you going to do? Sometimes I think about the people I've talked to, trained, and they say, why would someone put up with this? Why would someone make that choice? And honestly, I don't think people do make the choice to be with abusers. And to be clear, Epstein, he wasn't going after like your middle class, wealthy, young people, like whose parents were members of the country club. Like, those weren't the children that he was targeting. He was targeting those kids that came from homes that were in poverty, drug abuse. These were vulnerable young people. And there's a reason why predators target vulnerable young people, because they're looking for anybody who's going to show them love. And also, when you're in trauma, your brain just is not able to make the best decisions. It's just, you can't make reasoned, thought out decisions when you're in trauma, severe trauma, and trying to survive. And she was a teenager. And so teen brains are still developing. So so there are lots of reasons. And so I just think this story, while it's so difficult, I think it does really lay out how people end up in this situation, why they might make the choice, and also why they wouldn't get out. I would love to hear your take on this aspect too. So on previous episodes of the podcast, we've talked about some of the high profile cases of domestic violence, and often the question is, well, what about all the people around them? Why didn't they report it? Why didn't they come forward? And you do hear a little bit about the people that were working for them, like the chauffeurs and the housekeepers. And my feeling on that is that those people, while they may not be experiencing the abuse, they also are a victim of that system. Because if you're working for someone who is a billionaire and you see him bringing in law enforcement, government folks, European royalty, some of the richest, most powerful people, like, where are you going to go and tell that story?
Yes. And those, that kind of holding over, resources, such a powerful motivator. Like, to your exact point, all the individuals within that system relied on Epstein and Maxwell, whether that was for monetary support, whether that was for influence. And so, I think about the many individuals who probably saw stuff and were weighing out, okay, are my kids going to be fed or am I going to say something? And I also think too about even just kind of, there's such a level of like uncomfortability and embarrassment with situations like this. I think often it's a response of bystanders of like, well, do I actually know what's going on? I feel really uncomfortable. Not my business type of mentality that I think also then it's like, okay, it could be either of those, or I could combine them. So I don't want to accuse my employer of, some type of harm, because if I do, like maybe I'm going to get it wrong, or I'm then going to lose my job. And I think all of those pieces then impact if people say or do anything.
I'm curious if, as you were reading, if there was a part of her story or someone that she met where you thought like, okay, if this person had done something differently, she could have been saved.
Yeah. I mean, the instances, and I'm like, I don't want to misquote it. I'm feeling in my brain, because it's been also a little time for me, but if I remember correctly, I want to say there was a chauffeur and maybe a chef, both if I'm thinking of the right individuals, who like could tell and like she kind of noted.
Yes.
And I think too, it's, what would that have looked like if that person not just saying like, I'm so sorry, but like what would their tangible intervention, them actually taking further steps, how could that have potentially intervened? I think there's a challenging thing in which when you have young people, because obviously even if she was past 18, girl still didn't have resources. I think we're thinking there's this magical number that as soon as she turned 18, she had options. It's like, but that was not the case at all. So I think there's a question that I have of, I don't think it's just enough for those adults in that situation to say, I'm so sorry this is happening, this is not okay. But what are they doing to like make some type of additional option for that kid or for that situation?
For me, I think the two biggest areas that as a society we just have to address, number one is parents. If you aren't creating a safe, healthy, stable home for your kids, whether they're your bio kids, your step kids, your foster kids, if that's not a safe place, then those young people are going to be at risk for whatever harm a predator wants to do to them. And, in the story, that was part of it. Her father was abusing her, but mom knew and turned away, like didn't do anything. And so when I talk to parents and I'm educating them, sometimes they're like, what do I do? Like, this is such a huge issue. I said, probably the best thing that you can do is create a safe, stable environment for your kids. Because if you don't give them that love and support, they're going to find it elsewhere. And those people are not going to have their care in mind. The other thing I thought is really the systems. there are so many rich and powerful people that are a part of this story. There were some people who are celebrities that she was describing it, and I was trying to figure out, like, who is that? But some of them were in government. Some of them were law enforcement, like the police and the prosecutors, and again, former Prince Andrew. And so the system that protects people that have money and that have power means that victims are going to suffer abuse and they are not going to get justice. Now, I will give the UK credit, like, they stripped Andrew of his title, and he's not able to do any of it. Like, they held him accountable, I guess, as much as they could from that royalty perspective. But that hasn't really happened here in the United States.
No.
And so Virginia's story is just one of probably many that we don't know about. Her story got news, but how many other Virginias are out there where the systems are failing them and no one's being held accountable because the perpetrators have money and power?
Yes. Yep. Let me tell you, like, that was something else. And I still continue to think about this in the wake of reading this book, to your exact point of, she's somebody whose name we knows. Think about how there's a possibility that my, cashier at my local grocery store ringing up my groceries was potentially a survivor of Epstein and Maxwell, because there are so many unnamed individuals. And when we talk about what you're talking about of just the kind of the failure of accountability and justice to happen in very meaningful ways, I'm like, and I will probably never know, the cashier's story. Because why would the cashier come forward if this has been the result and response of other survivors coming forward? So I think it's, I think it's worth asking, like, and just thinking about this, and also being really clear with and honest with ourselves around how are we talking about these things, even within our own communities, because you just never know who in your community maybe have experienced harm.
Exactly. I talk about that all the time. I say that to every audience that I'm training. The prevalence of domestic violence is so high, meaning we all know a survivor, but that means we also know an abuser, and survivors that you don't even know. And so how you talk about things, how you talk about these cases in the news matter, because those people around you are listening and determining, is that a safe person? If I need help, can I trust them? Can I go to them? And I think when you meet those people, at this point, I know that we all know everybody has trauma. But when I see other people are like, oh, they're just bad, they're making all these horrible choices, the first thing I'm thinking is, oh, they must have been through a lot of trauma. And and I think for me, that's one of the takeaways that I hope people get when they read this book, that you can't take things at face value. And we often want to write people off as being bad and they're whatever. That's their trauma, most likely, that we're seeing. And we just have to treat people with compassion, even if it's just like a nod, a look in the grocery store at that cashier that says, hey, I see you.
Absolutely.
What do you hope readers take away from this book?
This is a really good question. I think my immediate answer is believe survivors the first time, because,
Yes. Thank you for saying that.
Yes. And the reason I say this is like, this was not the first time that people said, these individuals are causing harm, like across many different ways. And so if those folks would have been believed, if there would have been, even I'll go a little like prevention educator spicy for a second and say, hot take, what if somebody would have seen, Epstein and the ways in which he moved in the world, where the world kind of revolved around him? I'm assuming there were probably like little side things that he would say or do that kind of indicated that, like, oh, you don't really care about anybody other than yourself. What if the people in his life would have said, hey, what's up with that? Can we talk about that? Those things, we may not have been then in a situation, in a spot where we are at now. So I think believing survivors the first time, I will also add on just knowing that survivors are going to be messy and they're going to be flawed and they're going to make decisions that maybe straight up are manipulative, or they come across as manipulative because that person is surviving. And so just thinking about how much, if we now have this person's story in front of us, how can we then use that to really inform how we show up for survivors and not hold an expectation of like how a survivor is supposed to act, providing that safe place to land while they're still figuring it out.
Yes. Love all of that. That's a really great takeaway. Believe survivors the first time and understand that their journey is going to be messy. They know their situation best. Be a safe place for them to land. Wow. That is like the perfect wrap up to this conversation, Emily. I am so grateful that we had this time to discuss this book. If you are listening to this podcast and you're local, the Springfield Greene County Library District has this book available in multiple formats, including on the Libby app, so you can listen to the audiobook as I did. So if you would like to check it out, get your library card and do that. Emily, I know that you also are part of a similar book club. Do you want to tell us about that and how people can get connected if they're interested in book discussions like this?
Absolutely. So I run what's called the Lotus Lounge. So it is a virtual book club. We read both fiction and nonfiction books kind of adjacent to these topics. Right now we're reading Big Little Lies. Folks might be familiar with the HBO show by the same name, really giving us an opportunity to dive into topics that maybe we would ordinarily have the time and capacity in a normal workshop to talk about. So that is virtual. Folks can find more information by going to faithconnections.org. We will also be continuing on into next year, hot off the press. Y'all are some of the first to know. So please feel free to check us out if a virtual book club is of interest. And I will tell you, we're like a really chill book club. You cannot read the book and still participate, or like read 2 pages and still come. Like, we just want to see you there. So
love
please
that.
feel free to check us out.
No shame, no blame. Just show up. And Emily is really cool. I haven't had a chance yet to hop on, but I'm going to, and we will include a link to that book club in the show notes. Emily, thank you so much for this conversation, and thank you for the work you're doing in prevention.
No, thank you so much for having me. This is one of those books that I read and was like, who can I talk to about this? So the moment you were like, hey, can we talk about this book? I was thrilled. So thank you so much for having us, and thank you for the work that Harmony House does in the community.
All individuals have a right to a life free of abuse. If you or someone you know needs help, please call our 24-hour hotline, 417-864-SAFE, 417-864-7233, or chat 24/7 with an advocate on our website at myharmonyhouse.org. Visit our website or follow us on our socials to stay up on the latest news and events. This is Voices Against Violence. Thanks for listening.